Welcome everyone. We'll give everyone a minute or two to join us, but welcome to the Strata Public Viewpoint webinar, where today we'll be talking through some new data from Strata's COVID-19 Work and Education Survey. We'll give everyone just a minute here to join us. For those of you just joining us, we're giving everyone another 30 seconds or so to get into the room before we kick into conversation. Great. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Jenna Talbot, Senior Vice President at Whiteboard Advisors, and I have the privilege of working closely with the Strata Center for Education Consumer Insights. I'm hoping many of you have joined us in the past for this ongoing series. You know, at the outset of the pandemic, Strata launched a survey of the general American public looking at COVID's impact on work and education. And it's hard to believe that we're now almost toward the end of 2020, but we're looking forward to walking you through some new data today. At this point, Strata has surveyed over 21,000 Americans. So you'll see some data from the last few weeks that's more recent, but also see us draw upon some more historical context since March. Today's conversation will be really focused on what Americans are thinking about when it comes to being able to access good jobs. As we're starting to talk about economic recovery and how to do so equitably, I think the findings you'll hear today will certainly help to inform that conversation. So I will hand it over to Andrew Hansen, Director of Research here at Strata, and then we'll get into a great conversation today. We've got panelists joining us, Isabel Cardenas-Navia, who's the Director of Research at WorkCred, and Dennis Dio Parker, who's with Toyota, who's leading a lot of their talent development. I'm excited to hear from both of them today. But Andrew, first I'll pass it over to you and let us walk us through the latest.
Thank you, Jenna, and on behalf of Strata, welcome, and thank you to everyone joining us today. We continue to be in a crisis in which millions of Americans are struggling to find work. Last Friday's jobs report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics was a positive development, but there are still 11 million unemployed Americans. That's down from a peak of 23 million back in April, but still nearly twice as many compared to before the pandemic. We also learned that more than half of those 11 million workers have been unemployed for 4 months or longer, and we're continuing to see a number of long-term unemployed workers go up. The good news is that the jobs are coming back. After we lost 22 million jobs, or 2 decades worth of job growth in the span of a month, we've seen about half of those jobs come back online. The bad news is that it might be a while before the job market comes back to full health. The Federal Reserve isn't projecting a return to full employment until 2022, and a return to the pre-COVID unemployment levels by 2023. The big problem right now and for the foreseeable future is just that there aren't enough jobs to go around. We've got 6.4 million job openings and 11 million unemployed workers, which is roughly 2.22 workers for every available job. The upshot of that is that the only way to fix the problem is to get our economic engine going again, so there are eventually enough jobs to go around. At the same time, even in this crisis, we still have more than 6 million job openings, which is down from 7 million before the pandemic. And while we've mostly seen a decline in job openings across the board, across different fields, there are many fields where we've continued to see growth in job openings over the course of the pandemic. Manufacturing is one example. It's up 3% compared to last year, and there are 460,000 job openings in that sector. And we're fortunate to have Dennis with us today to talk about the challenges and opportunities in the manufacturing sector. We've also seen an increase in job openings in fields like healthcare, transportation and warehousing, software and IT, sales and marketing, and several other fields. The challenge is that the skills and the interests of unemployed workers are often not aligned with the jobs that are available. And that's why education and training providers have a really unique opportunity, we think, to help people acquire the knowledge and the skills that they need to get back on their feet and back to work in a good job. But so far, we have not seen more people pursuing education. The National Student Clearinghouse released new enrollment data this morning that reflected that declining enrollment, especially at community colleges and AA and certificate programs. It hasn't happened everywhere. Colleges that are primarily online, for example, they've seen an increase in enrollment by 5% compared to last year. And their growth rate has actually doubled compared to 2019. In 2019, it was 2.5%. As I said, it's now 5%. And we've also seen a lot of anecdotal evidence that many non-traditional providers, like boot camps, for example, the pandemic has actually been good for business. Earlier in the summer, on the right hand, you can see we reported some early signals of the disruptive effects that the pandemic was having on Americans' education plans. We saw a quarter of working age Americans say they had to change their plans as a result of the pandemic. And that included 9% who said that they were delaying their enrollments, and 5% who said that they were changing providers. And we're largely seeing that take root now. Part of the story is that students who are in hands-on, in-person programs couldn't go back. A big part of it is folks who are delaying their enrollments until it's safe to go back in person. And then the evidence is suggesting that that students who've decided to switch to an online college is also a part of this story. And so that's the context that brings us to this week's edition of the Public Viewpoint, as Jenna described well. This is our regular nationally representative survey of 1,000 Americans ages 18 and older. As she said, we've surveyed 21,000 Americans since March, and we've been asking them about their plans, their preferences, and their perspectives when it comes to education and work. Before we dig in to this week's topic, which is about, we're investigating Americans' beliefs and their attitudes about their access to good jobs and the extent to which they believe that education is the solution when it comes to getting a good job or advancing at work. I do want to encourage you to post your questions to the Q&A. Also, if you haven't already, introduce yourselves in the chat. My colleagues, Nicole Torpey-Sabo and Carrie Sampson, are on deck to answer your questions about the Public Viewpoint survey and the analysis that I go through with you. But please post your questions to the panel as well. So with that, let's dig into the results. So the first question we wanted to investigate was how many Americans feel stuck when it comes to work. Specifically, to what extent do they believe that finding a good job is really difficult, or that they don't really have opportunities to advance in work in any way? And so we found that about half of Americans said that they felt this way, that they felt stuck, that they couldn't see a way to make progress when it comes to work. We then asked them why that they felt stuck. Why do they feel this way? What's getting in the way of them getting a good job or advancing in their career? And we had 70% of our respondents say something was getting in the way. And these were the most common answers that they gave. Similar shares, around 45% or so, said one of these three things. One, the system isn't fair for people like me. Opportunities just don't exist when it comes to getting a good job or advancing at work. Two, they said that their employer wouldn't provide training or wouldn't pay for them to go get education elsewhere. Three, they said they understood that there was a gap between the skills and the credentials that they had and the ones that they needed in order to make progress. And then we had a smaller share of people who said that they were lost, like they didn't know where to start. The system was too difficult or too complex to navigate. So then we asked people directly about the value of education and training, like I said, with respect to getting a good job or advancing at work. And their answers ranged from education would give me a very strong advantage to it would make no difference whatsoever. And we divided our sample into two groups based on their education, those without a college degree and those with a college, with an associate's degree or higher specifically. And there's some good news and some bad news here, I would say. The good news is that irrespective of their education level, the majority of Americans think that education would provide at least some advantage in helping them get a good job or advance. The bad news is that that compared to those with a college degree, those without college degrees were more likely to say that education would make no difference in their ability to get a good job, and far less likely to say that it would give them a very strong advantage. So in other words, the people who need or would benefit from education the most, and I think the group that most of us are focused on helping, that group is also the most skeptical of education's value, while those who already have a college degree, have a lot of education, want more of it and are more likely to think that they would benefit. So the next question we asked was, for those who said that education wouldn't actually be worth it, what's the number one reason that's driving that calculus? And the most common reason was that the financial cost was just too high. 32% said that was the factor that was motivating them. I think many people just have sticker shock when it comes to the price tag of education, even if it is worth it in the long run. But the other way to look at this data is that while 1 in 3 said that the financial cost was most important, the other 2/3 said it was something else, including, it really wouldn't provide me with any benefit at work. It would require me to take too much time away from work, or something we've seen before, which was that they didn't think that they could actually succeed in an educational setting. So we then asked folks, specifically those who didn't have a college degree, well, what would change that calculus? What would increase your confidence in the value of education? And here our respondents, we can put the answers into 3 big buckets of what people told us. They did say there were about 40% or more for every factor that you see here of folks who said that this would increase my confidence in the value of education. And those 3 buckets are: 1, stronger connections between education and work, things like partnerships between employers and education and training programs, work-based learning opportunities, such as apprenticeships and internships, or education that's more relevant, more closely aligned with the skills that employers are actually looking for. The second bucket was more support. If they could have more support to actually help them be successful in their classes or in their education. And then finally, there were folks who said that they needed help navigating their education and career, help identifying the individual skills gaps that they had, or identifying what pathways were available to them based on their talents. And finally, one last interesting thing that we've seen over the course of this work is a signal that Americans' plans and preferences are changing, and they're shifting more and more towards work-based education and training options. So since May, we've been asking our survey respondents whether they plan to enroll in an education program in the next 6 months. And if so, what kind of program do they plan to enroll in? And so what I'm showing you here is the providers and the program types broken into 3 categories. The light blue line at the top, that includes work-based learning options like apprenticeships and internships. It includes employer training, and it includes online training and certifications from providers other than colleges. Then the green line is folks who plan to attend a 2 or 4 year college online. And then the dark blue line at the bottom is those who want to enroll in person at a 2 and 4 year college. And so what you've seen is just a substantial increase in the interest in plans to enroll in these non-traditional or work-based training programs going back to May, as well as an uptick in interest in online. So what should we do is always the question that we come to, and a lot of that will focus on discussion in the panel. But our perspective is that we think part of the answer to all these challenges is putting what we call the education consumer, so the student, the trainee, the worker, putting them at the center of everything we do. And when we do that, a clearer picture really begins to emerge about how we might go about addressing these challenges. So just let me highlight a few things that we've been learning through this public viewpoint work. One, what we've seen is a real need for navigation tools to help people understand their personalized skills gaps, as well as help illuminating pathways that are available to them based on their talents, which aren't always clear. 2, there's this really high need for support, whether that's mentoring or coaching or advising, to cultivate a growth mindset, help them overcome self-doubt and the other apprehensions that they may have, and as well as just support for learning itself. 3, it's clear they're asking us over and over again for integrated opportunities that help them earn while they learn. And as well as what we've seen before is this interest in short-term non-degree pathways that are more designed for lifelong learners, mid-career adult learners who are trying to reskill and upskill and take that next step in transition. 4, I would say, is a need. There's a real desire to learn in an employment environment. So we have to find ways to incentivize employers into providing training options and funding training or education, as well as just nudge workers. Sometimes they often have the benefits available, but they don't actually use them. So for just one example, 2/3 of employers actually offer some kind of tuition assistance, but the uptake rates are usually somewhere between 2 and 5%. And so we need to find ways to nudge workers into taking advantage of those benefits. And then the last piece I would say is we need to leverage intermediaries. Employers and educators can't do all of these things themselves, and there are many cases where intermediaries can help build that connective tissue that doesn't exist to bridge the divides between education and work. And there's a lot of different kinds of intermediaries, and perhaps we can discuss this in the panel, but there are those who facilitate work-based learning. There are those who help educators align their programs with workforce demands. There are those who help with hiring and staffing. And we think that there's going to be tremendous growth in that area going forward. And we're fortunate to have Isabel in WorkCred, great example of an intermediary that's helping build that connective tissue. And we're really excited to hear from her about what WorkCred is up to. And I also have to mention that Strata has actually co-sponsored an upcoming report in partnership with Lumina Foundation on the role and the value of intermediaries, where we convened a global panel of experts. So please stay tuned for that in the coming months. But with that, I just want to thank everybody who's joined us today for the work that you're doing in this very challenging time. And I appreciate you joining us in this conversation. Finally, I want to encourage you to follow up with us at consumervoice@strataeducation.org. Please email us there and visit our public viewpoint webpage at strataeducation.org/public viewpoint, where you can explore our data yourself, as well as view some of the results that I discussed from the prior weeks. But with that, Jenna, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Just a reminder before we jump in, I'll start with a few questions for Dennis, Andrew, and Isabel, but definitely use the Q&A section. I've already seen a question pop up there, which we'll get to shortly here, but we'll try to make sure we incorporate as many of your questions as possible, and really looking forward to a good chat. So Isabel, let's start with you. So when you first saw the data here, you were struck by how many people feel stuck and really unsure that education would be worth the cost. I know from your research at WorkCred, you've been looking at entry-level certifications and perhaps other smaller steps that might put folks on the path to a degree and to meaningful careers, but not necessarily require that full investment up front. Can you speak a little bit to that research?
Absolutely, and thank you. Very delighted to be here today. So yeah, certifications are a great way for someone to gain entry into a meaningful career. And just to clarify, because I think sometimes there's confusion about what I mean by certification. By certification, certifications are a third-party assessment of competencies that are specific to a role or a job. They're time limited, they're renewable, so they're meant to talk about those competencies in a way that's relevant and current to a job as it's being practiced right now, and they're revocable. And so many certifications can be earned on a short time frame. So this is a little bit different, and because they're assessment based, it's not time based or based on a certain number of courses that you're taking. The typical cost for a certification is a few $100s, and they verified a set of skills, which gives employers confidence that someone has the skills to be able to fill a task or role. And oftentimes these certifications are, I would say the majority of the time, the certifications are developed in partnership with employers. And so they're not sort of a group of folks thinking about what might be relevant to a job, but they're really tested, and employers are part of the process to develop the competencies that are tested in the certifications. They exist across a variety of industry sectors: manufacturing, hospitality, retail, healthcare, technology. So you really see them across all the different job sectors. And in all of those job sectors, we also see entry-level certifications. And so those are ones that don't have educational prerequisites, which is obviously something that's really critical for someone who's looking to find something employment in the short term, and they don't require previous experience. So they're really sort of a way to prove that you have competencies, so you can gain confidence that to the employer that you can do a job. And once you earn a certification, there are often additional certifications you can take to advance in your career pathway, or they're a great way to think about moving into a degree program. One of the things that we have seen certifications bodies doing lately is to have micro certifications or shorter certifications that can stack for a certification. So you can start, at a really low level to get into it. And so, they're really valuable way for individuals to gain entry to career. And I want to add, they're also valuable to individuals who already have a degree. We actually see a lot of certifications are earned by folks who have degree program in a way to specialize or show continued relevance in their career pathway. And then the last thing I'll say is I'll add with a note of caution, which is that it's important to seek out quality certifications. WorkCred recently put out a short document in partnership with the National Governors Association that talks about quality credentials. And within that, we talk about certifications. And we have a list of questions on our website, which folks can look at to help determine if something's a quality certification, because certainly certifications are accredited, but having that quality and feeling like you're going after and investing in a credential that's quality is really important when you want to think about entering into a new profession or investing in that type of credential.
Thanks, Isabel. And I think I'm seeing a lot of questions already around credibility, around how to find those. So we will certainly get to that pretty quickly here. But Dennis, talk to us about the FAME Academy. You developed this program at Toyota, and it reflects a lot of what we're hearing from American consumers through this survey. They want stronger connections between their education and training experiences and their work. So can you share with us a little bit more about the FAME model and what you've been learning along the way?
Thank you, Jenna. And I too am very pleased to be with here in the audience today. First thing I want to note as I jump into this program did start at Toyota. And a few years back, our initial vision was to put it into place in 8 locations where we had operations in the US. But to make sure that the audience really understands today, there are about 400 employers involved, 34 locations, 36 colleges and universities. And so it has scaled well beyond Toyota. The point being, there are a lot of people and a lot of players involved in FAME now. In a nutshell, and I will tell you the thinking for this, I was thinking about this as you were talking, the thinking for what we have today started in the early 2000s. The proposal was in 2005, first action in 2006. So a lot of what you'll hear is not recent, right? We've been thinking hard about this and deeply for a long time. Very basically, we as employers, and we're coming from an employer perspective, 3 big problems. There are not enough technicians to fill our jobs. And earlier in your PowerPoint, I think you said right now, your survey said 2 people for every 1 job, right? Secondly, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment too. Secondly, those who are graduating, we're finding out they're not work ready. They've just finished a program, but they're not really ready for work. And thirdly, due to a disproportionate distribution in the workforce, there are a tremendous number of technicians getting ready to graduate, which is going to make the first problem, even worse, right? But let's go back to that 2-to-1 ratio that you showed earlier, right? If we have all these job openings, you had a number for that too, right? 400,000 plus, and we've got 2 people for every job opening. Well, why the heck aren't we filling them? It's an alignment problem, right? The pipeline is broken. These jobs that we have, they require skills, they require certain capabilities, and the system is not effectively moving, and the system in general, right, is not effectively moving people through to go into those job openings. A lot of people are losing out because we have great jobs with great pay. We're losing out because we have a lot of great people that we're not getting, right? And so we put in the FAME program, and I'll try to make it as brief as I can, very brief, but basically it's entirely employer driven. We didn't go to a college to work this out or see what they could do. We designed the entire program, process, content from bottom to top, and it's a career pathway program. It engages pre-K to 12 in certain very intentional structured ways. It has a totally reborn 2-year associate degree. It moves people into work, but it also provides those who are motivated to do so additional education beyond that, and it's all completely seamless. The way the program works at a local level, first, a group of employers will come together and decide that this program will be implemented. From that point forward, they work as if they are one entity. Then they will choose the partner college. It's not just automatically going to whoever the public community college is. We will, if there's more than one choice, we will let the colleges compete, because we're going to bring them a lot of advantages and benefits. We will let them compete for this. One reason we do it, a lot of change is required by the college. It's not the way they've done things before. And so we want to see that they're ready to come with us and make that change, right? When they are, we start the program. We create a continuously moving pipeline of talent. We just get kids excited about STEM in K-12 and the upper regions of that. We start promoting our career sector that we have. We choose them into the AMT program. We co-educate employers and colleges together. We co-educate as they go through this program, and then they come into the workforce. There's a lot of detail I left out. If that gives you an idea of how it works, that's essentially what FAME does. Results, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the numbers out there, but if you're a selected FAME student on day one, over 80% of those students will be there on day end in graduating. That's compared to an average 29% graduation rate in other technical programs and parallel technical programs. The number is going to be coincidental, but if you graduate, then about 85% of those immediately move into full-time employment. The Brookings Institution and Opportunity America just completed a year-long study of outcomes for my next number. And so what we find is that in the first year, FAME graduates, AMT program graduates on the average are earning just under $60,000, $59,000 and some change. By the third year, they are approaching 90,000. And by the fifth year, they are approaching 100,000. The program is very successful. I don't know that it's a cure-all for everything, but I think there's a lot to be learned from what we do. Your 6 things in your survey, I forgot what you called them, but the 6 reasons, FAME actually addresses all 6 of those or engages all 6 of those in one way or another. And the web diagram you had of the 5 aspects that came after that, wraparound services, the whole bit, we actually engage with intentionality and structure, all 5 of those. And so so I think there's a big message there. The more we increase those, the more schools or colleges, employers, EDOs, workforce services can address those issues. We would say that's right on the nail head. We thought they were important a long time ago. We brought those and structured those into the program, and they're providing a lot of the results that we have. So that's a bit of an overview.
We'll weave in I know you will weave in some of the lessons that you've learned into some of our next questions. One quick follow-up, because a number of folks are asking, can you say a little bit when you were talking about the 3 problems? Number 2 was that folks weren't, even those that had the technical experience may not be arriving work ready. Can you speak to how you define that?
Yeah, sure, I can. And again, there won't be in this short frame enough detail, but here's a big picture. We have a little informal perspective that we have in the employer's world, right? We hire people for their hard skills. We fire them for their soft skills, right? On that. What do most of our programs do? If it's a technology program, they teach them technology. That's good, right? But it ends there, right? We're teaching them technology. When what we really need on the employer side is we need an entire well-developed person, right? So remember I said the 2-year associate degree portion, though, and they go 5 straight semesters, though. We don't get a summer off in work. You don't get one off in education either, right? In this program, we have 3 components. And so this will speak very clearly to some of what you just mentioned, Gemma, because obviously we think all 3 of these are important. Technology is still there. However, we add to it, and many of your audience will recognize this, perhaps not all, lean manufacturing. These are work practices on the operational floor that enhance business outcomes and work efficiency. But the third thing we add are professional behaviors. We have a comprehensive set of 20 professional behaviors, soft skills that we address with structure, intentionality, and outcome, because we realize how critical those are to being successful at work. In fact, I'll kind of maybe leave this answer off right here with this. We don't call that program Advanced Manufacturing Technology, like a lot of colleges do. Technology is about equipment. We call it Advanced Manufacturing Technician because that's a person, and our focus is on developing, the person.
Thank you for that. That's helpful.
Jenna,
Great.
do you mind if I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got so my father worked in manufacturing still works. He's a line technician. Um, like all my brothers are in blue collar kinds of jobs. My brother's in the paint trade. I guess my other brother works in inventory. Another one works in a factory. But my sense is, aside from the skills gap, Dennis, which I think is very real, is that manufacturing has an image problem. Like those jobs are not seen as prestigious. That we are not preparing, whether it's young people, as you've discussed in our conversations, the manufacturing workforce is on the older side. And so I think that that's a huge challenge as we think about moving people into these often very good jobs. As you mentioned, they pay well, there are pathways into them. What do you think about addressing that image problem and improving the kind of prestige and letting people know? Because I think the interest could be there, but it's just people, how do we change people's beliefs?
That image problem is a huge contributor. We're totally aware of it. We have numbers around it to measure that and understand what that is. And so on the one hand, we would say, yes, that absolutely needs to be addressed. On the other hand, and again, it doesn't take care of everything everywhere, but at least within the scope of the FAME program, we hit that head on. Here's the big picture, Andrew, with this. People have this image of what manufacturing is. Today, it's totally wrong, right? If they actually come into our manufacturing places, they're going to find out they're clean, they're well organized, we have great employee benefits, we're very focused on the satisfaction, of our workers that we have. But that message doesn't get across, right? A couple of examples of how we address this in the program. Number one, in the FAME model, recruiting, we don't wait to see, and that's probably evident from what I said earlier, we don't wait to see who graduates to try to hire them. Recruiting is led by the employers. We're the ones who go into the schools. We're the ones who speak. You can't see it right there. We have Toyota or whatever, the various companies that come in, and we find that they won't listen to everybody else, but when the employer's in front of them, we find they start to listen. We also organize tours into our plants. We get people in. We want the teachers to come with the students. We want parents to come. In our educational approach, we consider demographics to which we have to connect. We've got 5 of them: students, parents, counselors, administrators, and teachers, right? And here's a little factoid. The students themselves have to think that they're fully professional. They are fully professional, but we need to move that mindset there, right? One thing we do in the FAME program, when they're at school, they actually have to have what we call professional dress. Now, these are working clothes, not office clothes like mine, but they have collared shirts. They have to be tucked in. They have to be well groomed. And we tell them right up front, we're building a feeling of professionalism with you. Of many reasons we do that, but part of that is that attitude of professionalism will begin affecting how manufacturing is perceived. So there's just a quick shot at the question.
Well, I'm seeing, I just saw snaps from Andrew and the same in the chat. So we'll probably come back to some of this. Andrew, I want to zoom out for a second. So you've now surveyed 21,000 Americans. Consistently, we've seen that people are worried about their job prospects in light of COVID. We've also learned a bit about how Americans are thinking about the role that education can play. I'm curious, what have you learned so far in that process? And then in this particular breakdown of the data, we see some big differences between those that have a college degree versus those who do not. And so I'm curious what other differences have manifest so far in the conversation. Start with you, but then Isabel and Dennis, curious to get your reactions too.
Well, we have seen consistently, with respect to the differences between education, along the same theme that we've reported today, which is when you ask people about their interests, their appetite, how they perceive the value of education, people with less education, whether you do, high school or less, or, people without college degrees, they're less interested and they're more skeptical. There's so much evidence that they say that the options that are available to them they're just not satisfied with them. They're not pulling the trigger on on enrolling in those programs. So, and it doesn't matter how you ask the question. We've asked, is it worth the cost? Will it help you get a job? Would you recommend it? And what we've seen is that just so many of these folks just have enormous doubts about their ability to succeed in what they think of as education, which is a classroom-based environment. Many of them previously had a bad experience that they don't want to return to. They're not necessarily satisfied with their current job, but they don't know how to make progress. And, you know, as I mentioned, I'm from a family where nobody has a college degree. So it hits close to home. We're not talking about folks in the abstract. Like, my brother works in a job where he's not satisfied. And so I have a conversation, but he just can't see himself on one of these pathways. So I think it's an enormous challenge, is how do we recognize, I think we have to recognize that if we want to reach this population, we have to improve their perceptions of the value of education by telling the stories of things like fame and, you know, it just persuading them that it is worth the cost, that instilling the confidence that they can be successful, that it will lead to a good job. And I think part of the solution there is telling stories about individuals. That's part of what we've been doing through the Public Viewpoint. Is people just need to hear stories about others like them who look like them, who have succeeded, and that will allow them to realize new and different possibilities. And you know, I talked a little bit about mentoring, but it's also the media, right? Not the news media necessarily, but what kinds of stories are we telling through through film and television and books and whatever, and marketing, like education and training. And that's a huge part, I think, of how we change these perceptions, because I think it's just an enormous barrier, is the lack of confidence that education is actually going to work for this population.
Isabel, what are you seeing, particularly as you've looked at all of the different credentials that are out there and helping people navigate which ones might be the right fit for them? Any lessons for this group?
So I'm a researcher, so I'll pull the research and data that we've done. So I agree with Andrew that the stories are important, and having the data to show that, you know, it's not an isolated case is also important. So WorkCred did a study where we looked at individuals who had gotten the WIOA funded training, and that's Workforce Opportunity and Innovation Act, I believe. And so this was the first data available, which had outcomes. And we looked at 50 plus individuals. And for those who may not be as familiar with the WIOA program, it's for the access to funds for training from that program are for individuals who are displaced or underemployed. So, you know, in many ways, it could be analogous to some of the folks now who've been displaced or are underemployed because of the pandemic. And so again, we looked at 50 plus individuals. And I want to really highlight three things from the analysis we did. We did, you know, I want to say 60,000 some plus folks that we pulled over the latest data that was available. And the first was that certifications and certificates were the best overall value in terms of investment for these folks. And when I mean best overall value, I mean, excuse me, they had high completion rates between 65 to 80%. And they had the best outcomes in terms of reemployment after 4 quarters and of wages post training employment. And so they were also the overwhelming choice for the population that we studied. And so that really, really speaks to the fact that these training programs and, you know, even the you know, I'll call them short-term ones like certificates and certifications can really have an impact on an individual who is unemployed or underemployed. The second thing I'll highlight that our analysis showed is that there was a slight in-field benefit for individuals who sought these short-term credentials. So we sliced the data and looked at what fields the folks were employed in before they were displaced, and then after, where they found employment. And we saw that there was a slight increase in terms of employment and also wages if you stayed in field. So, you know, that if you're unhappy in your current position, it may not be that you have to switch industries or start over. You could think of getting some sort of training opportunity to continue along a pathway within your current sector. And then I think the last thing which I want to mention, which really speaks to some of the data we saw where folks didn't feel like credentials might work for them. And that was that the new credentials were beneficial to older workers regardless of the demographic group. And so we really, I really want to emphasize that those benefits in terms of wages and reemployment held true across the different demographic groups. And so, the impacts of programs like WIOA and the impacts of training and certification, short-term or long-term, really do make a difference on folks. And, so we really feel like, having that data can support, continued investment in these types of programs, but can also, give individuals who are looking to make these investments more certainty that there will be a benefit to participate.
That's helpful, Isabel. I'm going to jump in to a few of our audience questions and maybe go back to some of the other questions I'd love to hit on, but we've got quite an active group here. I'm going to pick a few of these that maybe are representative, but I've seen quite a bit in the chat about skills-based hiring. So this question is from Craig Hayward. Dennis, it's directed to you, but I think everyone else can chime in as well. But he's curious if Toyota or other manufacturers that you're working with are looking at skills-based hiring. His question here is, this could be by using micro-credential platforms or other skill verification platforms to hire individuals with the right skills, regardless of their formal degree or degrees. I'm curious how you guys are thinking about that.
So I think the fundamental answer to that's yes. With that, maybe an illustration of this, and Toyota started the same thing. Again, it's scaling very quickly and very widely now. It kind of recasts that question a little bit. Do we look at skills-based hiring, skills credentials? What do we need for skills? And I would say through the FAME program, the answer is yes. But what we're doing here is we're actually building it in up front, rather than having to cast out and look for it and see where we can find it. And I realize this is not the common solution for the moment. FAME is kind of a unique player in this, right? With that, we're basically saying we know what we need, right? Let's build it into the system. And if we build it into the system, then we are going to systemically get that. Now, let me take that. And by the way, I'll spare the detail here, but that's part of the reason for our seamless continuations beyond the associate degree, is we can continue to build that in and incentivize employees. They're now employees, right, to continue to do that. But going a little bit beyond that, I think that anything that would identify skilled areas, competencies, capabilities that are key to what we're doing and make that more visible is going to help our employers. We can say we got 400 in FAME. That sounds great. We've got tens and tens of thousands who aren't, right? And they have the same set of problems that we have. So anything that builds that area, I think is very good.
And I'll just jump in. I think with respect to skills-based hiring, there are a couple things to say. One is the top of the hiring funnel is broken. It's a technology problem. It is not, when you ask employers directly, as we have done in the past, what they care about, what they hire based on. They say that work experience and skills are far more important than credentials, than degrees. So that's what they're looking for. They're not hiring degrees. They want workers with the talent who can do the jobs. When it comes to their actual practices, many of them still use credentialing-based hiring technologies. And for that reason, and as well as keyword searches essentially to evaluate which candidates who apply for a job are going to get to talk to a human, whether it's on the phone or in person. And so that needs to change. And the answer to it is pre-hire assessments, having assessments that employers are satisfied enough will be able to evaluate the talent that they need and are also overcome regulatory barriers. We're not there yet, but I think within the next decade, we'll probably see a lot of progress on that front. The second thing to say is that credential-based hiring compared to skill-based hiring is absolutely terrible for diversity and equity challenges. And I think more and more employers are realizing that if they only hire people with credentials, with college degrees, that they're not going to be able to achieve their goals with respect to diversity and equity. And so that's, I think, why we have to continue to move towards a world in which skills-based hiring is the norm.
I'd like to add two things to what Andrew just said. I think part of the answer there, Andrew, too, is I agree with you, by the way, right? And as an employer, I'll tell you right now, if I can identify a set of skills and I'm confident they have that, I don't care what credentials they have. You've got what I need, right? That being said, but how do you identify that, right? So it's a very wide statement, very broad statement. The better that we can make credentials describe the skills they actually have, the easier, the more visible those people will be, and the easier it will be for us to reach out and make the connection. So I think there's an opportunity here to, and it goes back to the gentleman's question perhaps, what's the credential? What does it describe? What's the reliability of it? And how can we use it for messaging? That will help. And one more brief thing I want to say, we tend to be focused on technology for technology-based jobs, but I would say, remember, at least via FAME is just one thing on that. We're saying soft skills can be as important as the technology, and programs and ways to identify those capabilities, including credentials among others, will also be helpful. So begin thinking beyond just the technology set of skills.
I just wanted to agree with what you're saying, Dennis and Andrew. I think I did want to jump in with just a thought of caution when we think about skills-based hiring, which I think, Andrew, you rightly pointed out, is actually turning into assessment-based hiring. And, I'm not from the testing community, but there is a robust testing community which thinks a lot about assessments and testing and how to make them fair and equitable and actually test what it is you think you're testing. And, I think it's important that as we move down this pathway, that we realize that assessments can be inequitable and they can be biased, and that it really needs, a lot of thought needs to go into how they're developed as we think about them as a gateway for hiring, because we could just take one inequitable process and replace it with another if it's not done thoughtfully.
Thanks, Isabel. That's a great point. Let's come back to this topic of access and funding, right? How are people actually paying potentially paying? We see that cost is a big concern. I was originally going to ask you all, just around as we move toward a new Congress, right? What are some of the levers at a federal level that we have? You've talked about WIOA, but there's also a really interesting question here from one of our audience members. Maybe we'll start with, and then we can broaden it out to the broader kind of funding conversation. But the question here is, related to the 46% who said my employer wouldn't provide training or pay for education. Do you know if that's an awareness issue, or is it that common that employers aren't offering support? Andrew, you've mentioned before the tax benefits that we do give for tuition-based assistance. So love to hear your thoughts on that.
It is an uptake problem. It is, as I said, more than 2/3, according to some surveys, of employers offer these kinds of benefits, but they're buried deep in some HR document and nobody tends to even know about it. So it is about, for employers, having policies and culture that promote people actually taking advantage of these benefits. I worked for Apple many years ago. They gave us 5 hours every week of personal development time. We had to communicate with our manager how we were spending that time, and so they were sort of held accountable in this kind of thing. Employers don't have that kind of culture. I mean, if anything, we're pushed beyond, in most cases, beyond the 40 or 50 hours or whatever it happens to be, to have time and space to learn. And then I think some insights from behavioral economics, if anybody has read the book Nudge by Dick Thaler, the Nobel Prize winner, and Cass Sunstein. There are very simple things that you can do. We do this with our 401ks. We need to do similar kinds of practices when it comes to tuition assistance and reimbursement, or other kinds of opportunities to engage in training make those the default pathways, and you're going to go a long way, I think, to addressing the lack of uptake.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
So I'll add in, again, my caveat, it's not every program out there, right? But in FAME, you graduate college debt free. But we do it through a unique mechanism. We don't want to be dependent on government funding or restrictions, with that. And we want the students to be incentivized. So very fundamentally, it's a very structured program. We know exactly what it costs in a particular area. It's these courses, this tuition, these fees that you have to pay. These are what the books cost. Let's add in some for living expenses for a single person, right? And we set the wage at those employers. By the way, in this program, students go to school 2 full days a week, nothing shorter than 8 hours on the day either, right? That's not very work realistic. And they work with their employer 3 days a week for 5 straight semesters. The wage that they earn in those 3 days pays everything. And that's actually an intentional development part of the program too. We don't want to give them a wheelbarrow of money in a traditional scholarship. We want them to work, manage that money, see what you get for work, pay their tuition, pay their books with it. We want them to have that experience. And in the end, when they walk across the stage, they don't owe a dime. There's one way of paying for college education. I think that model is probably scalable, right? Andrew, I'm going to come back to this. I agree. Not all companies approach this the same way. I will make this one Toyota specific. We do offer education incentives on that, tuition reimbursement, right? We do that. We encourage our employees to do it. We get the fact that smarter employees make better workers. But I will also note, remember those seamless continuations I talked about? We've actually leveraged those to be maximized for students who continue to go on.
I'm going to ask us one last question. The purpose of Strata's Center for Education Consumer Insights is really around surfacing the perspectives of Americans, either those who have gone through the education system or have not, but trying to surface those perspectives to help inform post-secondary institutions, employers, training providers on how we build systems that are more responsive to the needs of the public that we're trying to serve. So my last question, you can have a magic wand in this one, but my last question is, based on what we've heard today, what's one change you'd like to see in our system? And that could be specific to an employer, that could be specific to an institution, or what you'd like to see workforce boards do. But based on what we've heard, what's one thing that might make a difference here?
I'll jump. Oh, go ahead.
Yours.
So I'll jump in with something which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who knows me. I think more linking data. We can make a better understanding of the system and where it's failing when we can combine data. And so, I think that when we think about the push to online learning and education that has occurred, there's a trove of data in there that would be great to be able to understand and analyze and see what's working, see where we can improve it. And that means that data employers and training providers are going to have to share the data and to be able to link it. And so that requires some change in perhaps how they might view that data. And it also requires us to have a trusted third-party provider who can aggregate the data and provide it so we can get meaningful insights and analysis of that data. And so I'll just briefly end and say that WorkCred is working on a project like this, where we are working with the National Student Clearinghouse, which brings together higher education enrollment data. And we're bringing together certification bodies which don't share their data, don't report their data to anyone, and asking them to link their data on their credentials with enrollment data and degree data from the National Student Clearinghouse to better understand. And let me add, the National Student Clearinghouse also links their data with wage data from the Census Bureau. And so we can begin to pull together an understanding of how credentials work together, how they impact wages and employment. And that can have, really, really powerful results that can inform our system on where we need to make investments, where we need to make changes, and how we can support different populations better.
Great. Dennis?
I had two wishes. The wishes are this. I would like to see our pre-K-12 space, with the assistance of those who can help with this, push STEM engagement as comprehensively as possible, all the way down to pre-K, age and grade appropriate at each level. The world is becoming more technical. Jobs are becoming more technical. That's where the pay is. It's going to help everybody if we can get kids lit about STEM. Secondly, I would like to see a sea change in how we promote and develop soft skill development in both the pre-K-12 space and the post-secondary space. And one of the reasons I would like to see that is I think effective development there will actually help address other issues that we have that affect us.
Great. Andrew, I'll give you the last word.
I'll try to be quick. I think just following up on what Isabel said, I think kind of the magic bullet, we've got in education, we have a ridiculous amount of data, actually, if you compare to other sectors. What we really need in the end is consumer information. And the magic, and that is a technology that would allow somebody to identify their own talents and illuminate the education and career pathways available to them, and as well as the skills gaps. What do they need in order to get there? I think if we could get that, that would be move the field so far from where we are today. I think we've got all of this data that we analyze and report, but if we could turn that into consumer information, it would be incredibly powerful.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Really appreciate your time. We'll share the recorded webinar and the deck that Andrew presented after the fact. Thank you all for joining us, and you can save the date. December 9th will be our next, and I think last of the year webinar. So hope that you join us all there. But Dennis and Isabel, thank you again for taking the time to share your experiences and insight with us. And Andrew, as always, thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.